Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janaballabha Giridharidhari. Gopi Janaballabha Giridharidhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Janaballabha Giridharidhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama Hare Hare. Jai Om Shabam Sabhadaraj Kachaya Stoter Satasi Srimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Om Vishabam Sabhadaraj Kachaya Stoter Satasi Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki. Gora Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 12, Creation of the Kumaras and Others, Text 7. Dhyanigryamanopi Bluvor Madhyat Prajapate Sajjo Jayata Tanmanyu Kumaro Nilalohitaha Dhyanigryamanopi Bruvor Madhyat Prajapate Sajjo Jayata Tanmanyu Kumaro Nilalohita Dhyanigryamanopi Bruvor Madhyat Prajapate Sajjo Jayata Tanmanyu Kumaro Nilalohita. Vaishnavis. Dhya, by intelligence. Nigrityamana, being controlled. Api, in spite of. Bruvo, of the eyebrows. Madhyat, from between. Prajapate, of Brahma. Sajja, at once. Ajayata, generated. Tat, his. Manu, anger. Kumara, a child. Nilalohita, mixture of blue and red. Translation. Although he tried to curb his anger, it came out from between his eyebrows, and a child of mixed blue and red was immediately generated. Purport. The face of anger is the same whether exhibited due to ignorance or knowledge. Although Brahma tried to curb his anger, he could not do so, even though he is the supreme being. Such anger in its true color came from between the eyebrows of Brahma as Rudra, in a mixed color of blue, ignorance, and red, passion, because anger is the product of passion and ignorance. Translation again. Although he tried to curb his anger, it came out from between his eyebrows, and a child of mixed blue and red was immediately generated. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. As you can see in this verse involving Lord Brahma, who's known as Adi Kavi, the original scholar, intellectual, scientist of the universe. As you can hear, things happen due to our consciousness, or you could say more informally, our mentality. Especially in this stage of the age of Kali, people are proud of their mentality. That's the way I am. That's me. If you try to correct them, if you try to point out some deficiencies, look, I'm just being me. And okay. You ask someone, why did you make this decision? Or why are you doing what you're doing? I'm doing me. And then you're just supposed to be quiet. Oh, enough said. I understand completely. And of course, when it comes to reactions that you yourself may observe, that, yeah, I could have done something better. I didn't have to do it that way. I caused a bit of commotion. I caused a bit of an unnecessary commotion. But what next? I forgive myself. Then you're really at the cutting edge of Kali Yuga. I forgive myself. And then you think that life is too short to have any regrets. You just got to go for what you know at the moment. That's the best you can do. You ask someone, why did you do that? It turned out to be pretty dumb. Yeah, but at the moment, it looked pretty good. Oh, okay. Sometimes I've heard our devotees give an excuse for something they shouldn't have done. Made a bad decision for their Krishna-conscious future, meaning they chose the wrong person and turned out injurious for their spiritual life. But when they're making that decision, often the excuse is given. It may not be the Krishna-conscious thing now, but it could be in the future. Oh, okay. He or she may not be the greatest bhakta now, but could be in the future. So let's go. So this is the standard in Kali Yuga. Everything is very impulsive. And the more impulsive, the better. In fact, your whole society, a consumer society, is built on predominantly impulse shopping. Those are the kind of people that merchants, business people like the best. Persons who look and see something, oh, I want it, I'll get it. You always have those shoppers who will research and scrutinize and carefully analyze. But don't think everyone's like that. Most of the economy is built on impulse purchasing. So in Kali Yuga, your impulses are worshipped. They're yours. It's your mind. It's your body. Free to do what you like. If you make a mess out of it, still, it's your life. Brahma has generated a reaction that he tried to control. Give Brahma credit, and you can't judge Brahma like you would an ordinary living entity. In fact, that's why in the purport, Prabhupada refers to Brahma as the supreme being. That means supreme being among material beings. So he tried to curb his anger. We discussed a couple of days ago, and you probably discussed yesterday, Brahma's anger that his sons, the four Kumaras, refused to generate progeny. They didn't want any offspring because they felt this will lead to entanglement. They wanted to be free for liberation. Now, it's true that many people today don't want children, but not because they fear entanglement in Maya. They just say it's cheaper not to have children. Furthermore, it is, if you can honestly be that way. But secondly, many people today are fearing, I'm talking about young persons between the ages of 14 and 30. Surveys show they're fearing the future. What kind of world is it going to be? I don't know if I explained to you the results of the biggest international survey done of young people last time I was here. This was done by Stanford University and a university in the UK, University of Bath. And they surveyed youth between the ages of 14 and 29 in 10 countries, including Australia, UK, USA, Canada, India also. And the numbers were astonishing. 72 or so % of the young people internationally are upset about the future. What's coming upon us? We don't know what's going to hit us. 55% say humanity is doomed. And 33% say we don't want to have children. What's the point in bringing children into a world that's so smashed by climate disruption and all kinds of upheavals? So there's a big difference between the older people and the younger people today. The older people are still indoctrinated on progress. Yeah, she'll be right. We'll pull through somehow. The scientists will invent something. Well, all around them, everything is crumbling, but yeah, it'll be okay. Someone will come up with a brilliant solution. It's always happened. But the young people today aren't like that. The ones who are sober, that is. They're wondering, what? It's like you're in your 20s, and this is the peak of your life, and it seems like the party is over before you can dance. Where is the economic certainty? Gone. I was just noticing the headlines briefly in the Australian news yesterday. The economists in Australia are saying that the economy has flatlined. No growth, zero growth, which for a materialistic society, that's bad news. No growth. The only thing that can keep society together is materially. And materially keeping things together means constant economic growth, never mind the effect on the environment or the people's psychology. So what you have today is the environment is just being destroyed. The minds of people, they're going nuts. And yet, the economy must grow. And now it's flatlined. What are we going to do? So there's a big difference in the vision of older people and those between the ages of 14 and 29. The young ones, they're in anxiety. It's a hard time to succeed. It's our time to make our mark in the world. And look, look what's happening around us. Our parade is being not only rained on, it's being flooded. What are we going to do? So no more is the term just crisis. There's a political crisis, economic crisis, there's an environmental crisis. Now the term is polycrisis. So many crises intersecting at once. So how are you going to solve this? Basically, if you're going to reverse course, you need a new version of a human being. That means a transformed consciousness. How are you going to transform consciousness? No one has any idea. You can pass all the legislation you want. You can change your political system, change your economic system, but you haven't touched the real problem, which is toxic consciousness. So Lord Brahma tried to control his anger. His anger is not ordinary. He's not an ordinary being. There was a reaction. Out came Rudra. Anger can be used in Krishna's service. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion, will teach you that all the emotions have their positive use in bhakti. You can learn how to use lust for Krishna's service. Everywhere you look, you see that should be engaged for Krishna's pleasure. That should be used for Krishna's pleasure. Krishna's desires should be fulfilled. That's lusting in pure bhakti. So we don't deny lust. We know what the origin of lust is. In one purport coming up, Prabhupada refers to a famous verse in Bhagavad Gita as the Rudra principle. Kama esha, krodha esha, rajaguna samudbhava. Very interesting, the Rudra principle. You wonder, why is there violence in the world? Why is there so much senseless brutality? People are being slaughtered here, being slaughtered there. Why is that going on? It's because of anger. But where does the anger come from? Anger is derived from lust. But lust seems so innocent, doesn't it? Especially between willing persons. What could be the harm? Things happen, you know. Things bump together in the dark. I mean, it seems so innocent because it's two persons or more trying to squeeze out some happiness from this world. What do you want? One devotee from Brisbane was telling me, so what do you expect, Maharaj? What do you think we're going to do on a cold winter night? These things happen, you know. So we have this notion that lust is natural, not only natural, but appropriate. As long as it's between willing persons. You do it, you get over it, or it goes on. But when you understand the Rudra principle, as Prabhupada calls it, you see where lust is heading. It must lead to wrath. Now, how could that be? Why must it lead to wrath? Because lust is never satisfied. So the question of our life is how long will it take for us to realize that we're being duped? The presentation of Maya is so enticing, so alluring. You'll be satisfied. You'll be fulfilled. Everything will be fine. Even if there are some wrinkles, they'll be smoothed out. And if you fail at full satisfaction the first time with lust, there's always the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. And what else is there to do on a cold winter night? So how does this Rudra principle begin? With love of Krishna. So basically in that purport to 337, Bhagavad Gita, Kama Esha, Krodha Esha, you find out that first there's pure love of Krishna, which becomes distorted, perverted due to misuse of our independence, and it perverts into lust. And then lust must lead to anger because you'll be frustrated with lust. But it's amazing that people don't want to say what it is. They won't admit to frustration from lust. They'll admit to frustration from their job, frustration with their family life, but frustration with lust, they can't even see it. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Frustrated lust soon becomes anger. And anger is what causes all the havoc. So if you want to analyze the world's problems, start with lust degenerating into wrath. Now, a process of spiritual realization is supposed to counteract lust. But simply performing austerities without bhakti can make the heart hard, and therefore anger is produced in that way. In the sequence of the Rudra principle given in Bhagavatam, anger, you can say, certainly it starts in terms of the individual with you have an angry heart, and then your eyes start to turn red, and then you feel like striking out with your fist. This is all described in the purports. And then you feel like kicking out with your foot. And then the Rudra principle also manifests in terms of flooding, fires, even weapons, because weapons are a transformation of the earth. Where does uranium come from? It comes from the earth. That's what's necessary for nuclear bombs. So you can analyze the whole cosmic manifestation in terms of the Rudra principle. When the waves in the ocean become furious, that's the Rudra principle. When the winds are blowing like a cyclone, that's the Rudra principle. And when human beings collide with each other and do violence on each other, that's the Rudra principle. Where does it all begin? How does it all begin? Our friend lust, which looks so inviting, so fulfilling. So we are speaking about how in that list of Rudra manifestations, it's also mentioned the austerities of yogis can give rise to the Rudra principle. And you see that in terms of Durvasa Muni becoming angry at Ambarish. Durvasa Muni was such an advanced mystic yogi without sufficient bhakti. At best, bhakti becomes secondary to their spiritual practices, which was the case at this point in time with the four Kumaras. The four Kumaras, remember, each one represents a different beneficial, a different benefit. First, Sankhya, the ability to analyze the material world and get to the root of the illusion. And then Yoga, the ability to develop mystic powers for liberation. Not bhakti, but just freedom from material existence. And then the third, vairagya, the ability to be detached. And finally, tapas, taking on austerities for the sake of controlling the mind and senses. So the 4 Kumaras, each one of them is in charge of one of those 4. But at this particular point, their bhakti is secondary. The bhakti is there. So you have mystic yogis like Durvasa Muni who got so upset with such a pure devotee as Ambarish Maharaj that he cursed him. Durvasa Muni was enraged, and his temper is famous throughout the cosmos. But you would say, why such a mystic yogi gets so angry? Because mystic yoga without bhakti makes the heart hard. I'm proud of my austerities. I'm proud of my powers. And the powers are phenomenal. And then there's the case of the Prachetas. Their father, King Prachinabarhi, another example of a king, chief executive who wants to retire. We talked the other day about Swayambhuva Manu's crisis. He wanted to retire, and he had no one to turn to take up the governance other than Priyavrata. But Priyavrata, since childhood, was off in the forest meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we spoke the other day how Lord Brahma himself had to intervene because Narada Muni was on top of a solitary mountain with Priyavrata telling him, stay out of family life, you're going to get entangled, stick to what you're doing now, meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we explained the other day, right, how Brahma, accompanied by sages like Marichi and Atreya, and even Lord Shiva showed up to convince Priyavrata, you've got to come out of your samadhi and take up the task of governance. So the same situation happened with King Prachinabarhi. He was governing, but where were his sons when it's time for him to retire? They were under the water developing mystic powers. They were submerged in the ocean for 10,000 years because their father understood that if my sons are going to rule, first they have to have mind and sense control. They have to do austerity, and that'll give them power to be successful householders. That's the classic system. You don't just go into household life. First, you train yourself in mind and sense control. And then you're ready to create a family that can benefit the world. So that's what the Prachetas were doing. But they were really into it, being underwater, developing mystic powers. And the father wants to retire. So he had to call his sons, come out of the ocean, and please take up the rule. So unlike Priyavrata, the sons agreed. There didn't have to be a huge summit conference with Lord Brahma showing up and Lord Shiva showing up and so on. So they agreed. When they came out from the ocean, they looked around and saw that wild trees had covered the earth. Unbeneficial trees. Prabhupada makes the distinction that some trees are just good for fuel, for firewood, cut them down. Other trees which give fruits and flowers are highly beneficial for not only human beings, but all living entities. So the Prachetas emerged from under the ocean, and they saw the whole surface of the earth covered with these wild trees, unbeneficial trees, because there hadn't been anyone in charge. There hadn't been any government that was taking up the welfare of the world. Evidently, King Prachinabarhi had already left. So in the interval between the kings leaving and the sons emerging from the ocean, the trees had just, like wild weeds. You have gorse here? Yes, like gorse just covered everything. And so the Prachetas, with their advanced mystic powers, became angry. What are these trees? And with their mystic power, the Prachetas, with their mystic power, they generated fire and wind, creating a firestorm. And they were in the process of wiping out all the trees, wiping out all vegetation. They were angry. What is this? We've been under the water for 10,000 years, developing mystic powers. And look, we come out of the ocean. Look what these trees have done. The weeds, the gorse, is just everywhere. So they were angry. And with their mystic power, based on their wrath, they caused a firestorm. Now, there's a problem with this. As Soma, the Devata, the demigod in charge of the moon, points out, Soma is in charge of vegetation. And so he knows, look, you're burning up all the vegetation, whether good or bad. All species of life depend on vegetation in some way. And you Prachetas, with your anger, you're indiscriminately burning everything. So then Soma tries various techniques. First, Sama, the Kshatriya technique of pointing out agreeable things. Like, look, all living entities need trees, and you as governmental leaders are responsible for protecting all living entities. Environmentalism is certainly in the Bhagavatam. The chief executive is responsible not just for human beings, but all species of life. All species of life, they're called praja. They're citizens of the country, permanent residents, whether they're insects, trees, what have you. So Soma pointed out that you're supposed to be ruling the planet. You've got to be considered with all living entities, including the trees. All living entities are citizens of your government. That didn't really work so well with the Prachetas. They were so angry. This is what anger does. It destroys your intelligence. So then Soma tried something called Bheda, pointing out differences. First, pointing out agreeable things. Now he's going to point out things that are divergent, things that are completely go against what the Prachetas are thinking. He said, anger descends upon us like it's dropped from the sky. All of a sudden, you fly into a rage. Maybe some of you have had that experience of just flying into a rage. Ah! I told you never to do that again. This reminds me of what you did 20 years ago. Ah! No one here does that, right? How long can this go on? And then you use the famous mantra. 4 words, or sometimes 3 words. And then you fill in the blank. All I'm asking for, or all I want, and fill in the blank. And that justifies you. I'm not asking for much. All I want is fill in the blank. So Soma is now going to try Bheda. So this anger falls from the sky suddenly upon you. And what you have to do is take a different route. You have to analyze with knowledge of self-realization, Atma Tattva, and see how you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the supreme controller, and in that way separate yourself, divorce yourself from the situation that's making you angry. Very good advice. In other words, Soma is saying, look, deliberate. In contemporary talk, he's saying, go for a walk, think about it, take a few deep breaths, But analyze how you are not the body, you are not the situation that's producing this anger in you. Call a time out. Think about it. That didn't work with the Prachetas also. So what did Soma finally have to do in order to stop the trees of the world from being totally destroyed? The next Kshatriya technique is dana, give a gift. By the way, the trees have a very beautiful daughter. She'll be the perfect wife for you all. That did it. So in this way, Soma was able to intervene. But our point is the Prachetas were able to produce such anger out of yoga, out of the development of mystic powers, just as Durvasa Muni did. And this is the result of a hard heart. Austerities make the hard heart, unless they are the bhakti austerities of pleasing Krishna. But just austerities for austerity's sake, especially to develop your own mystic powers for your own personal power and pleasure, your heart becomes hard. But anger can be used in Krishna's service. Narottam Das Thakur says, Kama Krishna Karmarpane. Just as lust can be used in Krishna's service, so can all the emotions, even anger. How did Arjuna fight the battle of Kurukshetra? He had anger, but it's anger, it's pure devotee anger, used completely in Krishna's service. Hanuman, when he torched Lanka, he was angry, but it's bona fide, genuine, pure anger used in Krishna's service. So we've explained how lust can be used in Krishna's service. Lust is love of Krishna gone bad, like spoiled milk. We've explained anger in Krishna's service. Even in the topmost portion of the spiritual world, there's envy used in Krishna's service. Some gopis become envious of others. You are with Krishna, not me. But they know. What do they know? Krishna likes this. You ask any young man, if you heard that girls are fighting over you, how would you feel? Yeah, this is what it's all about. Let it go on. So the young man enjoys that. Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. And so his girlfriends know. His 100% spiritual girlfriends know that Krishna will enjoy us competing for him. So that emotion is for Krishna's pleasure. I certainly don't recommend the married men here trying that. You'll get a few pots thrown at you, and you'll also get thrown out of the house. But this is an example of how everything can be used for Krishna's service. All our emotions are meant for bhakti. So the bhakti yogi is always trying to understand bhakti bhava, the emotions of being a devotee. Being a devotee is not some kind of dry, logical activity, theoretical activity. I am a devotee. I must do this. I must not do that. They tell me I should be like this. I shouldn't be like that. Bhakti bhava, the emotional condition of being a devotee, is vibrant with spiritual emotions. That feeling that I am Krishna's servant. That's emotion in its purest state. Nityananda Prabhu shows the example. Sometimes he's sitting quietly, and sometimes he suddenly jumps up I'm the servant of Lord Chaitanya. I'm the servant of Lord Chaitanya. I'm the servant of his servants. And he sits down and he's quiet. This is Bhakti Bhava. So you might say, what's the big deal about being the servant of Krishna? I mean, we know that's our philosophy, but that's just our philosophy. When it comes to real life, we've got lust, we've got anger, we've got greed, we've got envy, and it gets us into trouble. So how does bhakti going to deal with all that? There has to be a way for positive emotional expression in bhakti. Positive emotional expression means for Krishna's pleasure. You look at the world and you think, it's meant for Krishna. That's spiritual lust. Even just, you walk outside and you look at the grass. If the grass needs to be mowed, Krishna's grass needs to be mowed. That's spiritual lust. And then anger, who is impeding people's access to bhakti? There's still some countries in the world where devotees have to be in secret because of government oppression. So naturally, we become angry. How dare you stop human beings from achieving their full potential in spiritual development? That's proper use of anger. But the anger doesn't mean you go on a rampage and tear things down. It means you think of ways how to deal with the situation. Spiritual anger doesn't mean you lose your intelligence and go on a rampage or something. It means, how can this be? How can human beings live like this? Let me think of what I can do. So this is the exciting world of Bhakti Bhava. Bhava means emotional state. Generally, when we're talking about bhakti, bhava is the preliminary stage of Krishna prema, love of Krishna. But bhava can refer to anything. Like Krishna says, any kind of emotional state or emotional absorption. Like when Krishna in the 18th chapter of the Gita is describing the Kshatriyas. He says they've got Ishwara Bhava. They've got the controlling Bhava. The emotions of a controller. That's necessary for a Kshatriya. And then there's, of course, the famous Maitrini Bhava. That describes the emotional state generated by the attraction of man and women, between man and woman. That's Maitrini Bhava. It's actually a particular state of emotional intensity caused by the interaction of the two. So this bhakti science is very deep, very comprehensive. So our whole bhakti process is about how to transform lust into love for Krishna. And this is why devotional service is so important. Devotional service means using your senses to satisfy the master of the senses. We're so accustomed to our senses being our tools for us, for our egocentric life. My senses are from my body. My senses and my body are meant to fulfill me and fulfill and satisfy bodies that are in close relation to my body. But sarvopadi vinirmuktam tatparattvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhaktir uchate. Our senses are actually meant for satisfying the proprietor of the senses. When will we start to think my senses are rented or hired equipment to get a particular job done? In the human form of life, our senses are meant for the bhakti lifestyle. But in conditioned life, in illusion, we think my senses are meant for me, to be satisfied and to satisfy someone who's going to satisfy me. My senses are meant to get what I want. This is why we're in Maya. So how do we get out of this pit of illusion? We need spiritual sense activity. by engaging in spiritual sense activity, your spiritual senses gradually come to the fore. They're there. The spirit soul has spiritual senses, but we're unaware of that because of the material coverings. The material senses are simply coverings over the spiritual senses. So the more you engage in bhakti, the more your spiritual senses come to the foreground. So this is why bhakti is far away from just being a theology, religious belief. It's dealing with your senses. That's ground zero, your senses. That's why Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Dharma Vruda Bhuteshu Kamosmi Bharatarshava. I am the procreative sensory activity when done according to Dharma. I remember Prabhupada explaining that point in lectures. You can use all the senses in Krishna's service, even this. And all the brahmacharis would blush like, ooh. I remember once there was a big program in a park in San Diego during the countercultural days, and Prabhupada was speaking. He was on a stage, and the park was full of hundreds of hippies, and then there were about 100 devotees, and so we all sat down to listen to Prabhupada lecture, and he was speaking, and then someone interrupted. A hippie stood up and interrupted his lecture and started yelling in the middle of Prabhupada's lecture, I want sex! I want sex! I want sex! Prabhupada stopped his lecture and started yelling back at him, you can have it! You can have it! You can have it! And then Prabhupada explained the whole system of grihastha procreation with all the details. And all the brahmacharis were like, we didn't hear this. But he's doing it right in the middle of a public lecture. He's making his point. Bhakti includes everything when done properly for Krishna's pleasure. So please don't think that bhakti is just some kind of theology. Even our older devotees fall back into that assumption that, bhakti's a great idea, Krishna's cool, but, my senses, they just got to do what they got to do, I accept the philosophy. You're dealing with sense activity. They're the spiritual senses, they're the material senses. What comes to the fore in your life depends on how you use your senses in Krishna's service. All right, any questions? Yes. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj. I was just wondering, what is the difference between spiritual lust, spiritual anger, or just pride, or prideful anger? Because like you were saying at the start, can sometimes make excuses or justify, or maybe be in some kind of denial, or think it's something different maybe. But I was wondering, how can you know the difference, or if you're descending or not?
You ask yourself, is this for Krishna's pleasure, or are there other motives? And this is why we have guides, mentors, counselors. They can help point out, oh, you may be thinking this is for Krishna's pleasure, or you may be making the excuse, even though it's not for Krishna's pleasure today, it could be in the future. That's why we need guides, spiritual mentors. Otherwise, we can bewilder ourselves. Who was the one I was seeing yesterday chasing after a bull with a stick? Yes, I said, wow, this is for Krishna's pleasure. Controlling potency for Krishna's pleasure. I looked out my window. I saw this lady devotee with a sari on and a stick in her hand. Hut, hut, hut. I go, this is great. Just don't do it at home when you have a family. Anyhow.
Thank you, Gurudev, for your class. Just wondering, with all of these examples of anger being used, rightfully or wrongfully, it's in relationship with another person. Brahma with his progeny, Durvasa with another person, Ambarish Maharaj, Prachina Barhi with his sons potentially, and Prachina Barhi in relation to others. Often, where in relationship with others, there's sometimes good uses of anger. For example, we all remember potentially anger of our parents for good purposes. They want us to do a certain thing. When we look at like our relationship with other people, is anger, and this might side more into like the psychological aspects, is anger an actual useful tool in relationships, or is it better just to engage in loving relationships without the use of anger?
Well, if you're talking about between spouses,
No. This is
you'll have to answer that one. That's not my department of expertise. I was not man enough. But in the guru-disciple relationship, the disciple takes the corrective anger of the guru as mercy. A real disciple does that. But how many are real disciples? So often someone doing the service of spiritual master can't tell disciples what's really on the mind because they can't handle it. So you have to bite your tongue. And you can't fully benefit that disciple because you can't say the truth. You know, this is Maya. Otherwise, the disciple just snaps like, what is this? Gurus are just supposed to pat you on the head and tell you you're a nice devotee. You all know so much about Prabhupada being compassionate and merciful. Prabhupada could be the heaviest person in the universe. You don't know about that. So anger has its pure use in spiritual life. About married life and anger at home, I'll let you ask some of our experienced grihastas that question. I know one of my grihasta godbrothers always tells other grihasta men, never show your wife that you're angry. Women can't understand male anger. Just go out for a walk or something. Don't let them see you're angry. You'll never hear the end of it. 20 years from now, 20 years ago, you were so angry, I never forgot it. So that's what one grihasta man has told me. More than that, I cannot say about that particular context of anger.
What's the difference between spiritual anger and spiritual greed?
Both are emotions for Krishna's pleasure. Spiritual greed. Krishna's got to have this. You've ever been greedy before? For what?
I think,
milk sweets?
no, maybe for like doing things.
Like what?
Like going to places, like
You just-
special places.
You just feel, I got to do this, right?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. To play video games and other things.
Video games. I've got to have video games. I see. But then that same emotion can be, I've got to give Krishna this. be greedy to satisfy Krishna. Instead of, I've got to have a video game. I've got to go to the temple and see the deities. Okay? So that's spiritual greed. And we already talked about spiritual anger. These different emotions all have their perfect purpose in satisfying Krishna.
But, I mean, like, what's the difference in between them?
Just like there's a difference between material anger and material greed, there's also, for the sake of discussion and analysis, there's a difference between spiritual greed and spiritual anger. But they all are for Krishna's pleasure. So in that way, they're one. Okay?
So
Very
they're
deep
the same
question.
As, the same
Huh?
as. The same as.
The effect is the same. Don't be a Mayavadi. It's got to be one, huh? Everything has to be one. The result is one. The result is Krishna's pleasure. Okay? All right.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the nice class. I have two questions.
One, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. If someone say, I'm not religious, but I'm humanist.
I'm not what?
I'm not religious, but I'm humanist. And they say human beings are important than dogmas and traditions, parenting without God, how to raise moral, ethical, and intelligent children free from religious dogma.
They don't understand the goal of human life is self-realization. They're just thinking that all these spiritual systems in the world are the same. They're just external. They're just dogma, doctrine, theology. But if you think about what I've attempted to explain in class today, you see that bhakti involves reality at its deepest level. Your senses, your spiritual senses, your material senses. Sense gratification is there on every platform of life. We love sense gratification, but bhakti is teaching you, great, you love sense gratification. Real sense gratification is for Krishna's pleasure. Krishna is the most expert sense enjoyer. And he wants you to come back to him and share in pure sensory activity. So this person doesn't know what is real dharma. Even at the most basic level, the person doesn't understand what is the purpose of a human body. So we disagree from the very beginning of the equation. Anything else? Vaishnavis, no questions today? Besides one?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. You were saying in our class yesterday for the Krishna Pad that when you're on the path of self-realization, your mind's changing and so is your body. You're trying to find the unchanging aspect of our true being.
Mm-hmm.
So does that, if that's, we're looking for something unchanging, but our soul's meant to have activity, how are we meant to make sense of that?
The last part
like our soul's meant to have activity, right?
our souls what?
Like meant to be active, have activity.
They're always active, and that activeness of the spirit soul is demonstrated in conditional life by the activeness of the body, the material body. When the spirit soul leaves, how active is the material body? Finished.
But then when we're looking for something unchanging, even though our mind and body are changing, that's how we come to self-realization, right?
That's the first step. That's chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
Just the ABCs. But you got to go further than that. So yes, we all preach, we teach that you're not the body, but don't think that's the end of bhakti. The ultimate goal of bhakti is pleasing Krishna's senses. So first we have to be relieved of our misconception that we are the body and mind. And then we start thinking that there's a spiritual energy. Now, what is the source of that spiritual energy? That's the next step. So we take one step at a time, but don't think that step one is the all in all. because people are so dull today, and we're coming from such a dull society, it takes us 10 billion years to understand we're not the body. So this is why, finally, this is why Soma spoke as he did to the Prachetas. He tried Sama, speaking agreeable words. You know, we all understand the duty of the governments to protect all living entities. That didn't work. He went to Beta. You know, you should see the difference. See that you are different from your body and mind, and therefore separate yourself, Beta, from the anger. And that didn't work, so then he went to Dana, giving a gift. I've got a beautiful girl for you. That did it. All right, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.